This is the second lecture from the previous chapter, not chapter, the section, the production and cost. So before we cover the production, and today we will discuss how the cost influence the decision of the firms produce whatever. So let's move on. So first, we should learn the definition of economic cost. So this is quite tricky because this is not the thing that you usually think as a cost. So in economics, so we have the cost, but this cost includes the opportunity cost of all of the inputs that the firm can use or firm can insert to produce something. So like we should consider, every opportunity cost to produce some good, not just like our money or not just our raw materials to produce it, but we should consider another factors, which is opportunity cost. And that's the reason why economic cost is quite tricky to understand than just comparing with just accounting cost, the one that we usually think as a cost. So opportunity cost. So you know the definition of opportunity cost. Of course you should know that from now on, but just in case I want to review it, what it means. So opportunity cost, what is this? So opportunity cost is the value of the another best alternative, and that usually it is expressed in the value in the dollars, kind of like, for example. So I will give you an example. So you are a student and now you graduate your high school and you want to go to college. But the problem is you should pay $30,000 to go to college. So the option one is going to college, which requires $30,000. Okay? Then this is the cost to go to the college. But what I want to mention is the opportunity cost when you decided to choose this option. So we should have another options. So option 2. Our second option is to go to make a business. Okay, we start a business. I don't know where it is. The erasure does not exist. Okay, here. So we want to start a business. So I made a bread shop. So it cost approximately $40,000. And we have another alternative, which is option 3. Start a business, an actual business like startup company like tech firm. And it costs $30,000. So my choice is option 1, go to a college, which costs $30,000. But the problem is I want to calculate the opportunity cost when I decided to go to the college, which is another next best alternative, the value of the next best alternative, which is of course option 2, because it has a higher cost than the option 2 and the option 3, and that's the reason why this is another best alternative. Yes. Yeah. So actually this doesn't work in that way. Okay, I'll explain it again. I will think in that way, like the benefit that I can receive. So when I go to college, I can get a chance to get hired. And if you go to that firm, if you graduate the college, so if you go to college, then you might receive $30,000 for your first year income. But for your second option, if you decided to start your, my bread shop, then I can receive $40,000 for my income. But if I choose to start a technology firm, then I can receive $30,000 for my profit. So what do I need to decide? So actually, this one is the best choice, right? But I decided to go to college because I want to do that. So if I decided to go to choose option 1, then I want to know another opportunity cost. I want to compute my opportunity cost if I decide to choose option 1, which is option 2, because I can receive more dollar than option 3 if I choose this. So I can receive 40,000 US dollar, but if I just decided to start a tech firm, then I can only receive 30,000 US dollar, and that's the reason why my opportunity cost to go to college is $40,000. Okay, that's the idea. And now what I want to do is to decide economic cost, the definition of economic cost. As I mentioned earlier, the definition is quite tricky because this is the opportunity cost, the sum of the opportunity cost that you want to produce something. So it's not just like the price of the raw materials or inputs, okay? That's another factor that you should consider in your mind. Okay, let's move on. So, we have two different costs for economic cost. The first thing is explicit cost. The second cost is implicit cost. So explicit cost is usually about the cost that you think. This means that like the input prices, like you want to make table, then you should buy wood, you should buy chainsaw, things like that, right? Then you know how much they cost, and that is explicit cost. However, there's implicit cost. Like if you decided to use your wood to make table, but okay, you decide to use your wood to make table. However, as an alternative, you can make the chair by using that wood instead of making chair. In that case, the profit that you can earn when you produce chair is considered to be an implicit cost, and that should be considered to be economic cost, a part of economic cost. So that's the reason why it can be really tricky, but yeah, just as conceptual understanding, because in your exam you will not be examined relating to this type of concepts actually. So whatever, let's move on. So this is the definition of economic cost, and you can just read this. It's not really hard. I will not read this because I'm not the one who usually read just the presentation, but I usually prefer to give some more detailed explanations for that. So I'll just skip the definition. I'll let it say so. So money outlay, this is quite tricky. So money is just money that we have in our pocket, and outlay is like the cost. Yeah, the definition of outlay is like the cost that we use. So like how much money we spend to produce something. However, implicit cost is not about money outlay. It is about foregone income, something that we can't earn because of using that input, because of deciding to produce that production. So that's the big difference between explicit cost and implicit cost. So we move on. Hello? So we have fixed and variable cost. So fixed and variable, you know the definition, right? Because we should learn what they are. Fixed, variable, and fixed resources, variable resources, right? So fixed resources again is related to short run. However, in the long run, everything is actually variable, or the inputs are variable inputs. However, in the short run, again, I will review this: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. So land is usually fixed, right? However, labor and capital are variable inputs in the short run. However, in the long run, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, or four resources, are variable resources. So that's the things that you should remember, and I will explain this. So you can read the definition. Yeah, it's not really hard. So Fixed cost is related to the fixed factors, as I mentioned before. So fixed factors are usually land, can be capital as well, but usually land. So it's not about the level of the production, this means that the output. So fixed cost does not correlate with the quantity produced for your production. I would say Q output to clarify this. And variable cost is about, of course, variable factors because it says it is literally variable factors. So like we can think about land, labor, and capital. Even entrepreneurs can consider to be variable, but it doesn't have to be. You can skip this because if you don't have any plan to major in business, you don't really need to know what entrepreneurship means in your mind usually. So you can skip it, whatever. But variable cost is related to one level of production, which is Q output again. So this means that like I will give you an example. Marginal product of labor. This is total product over quantity of labor or just labor, right? Or just repeat as L. So in this case, marginal product of labor is affected by the change in the labor, the number of labor. And this is the reason why we say if it is related to the cost, if it is like the variable cost, so we say VC. The VC is affected by like labor, capital, things like that. However, fixed cost is not really related to these things like the change in the labor, change in the capital, change in the quantity output. They do not really affect the cost itself. So that's the big difference, and let's move on. So we first have total cost. What is total cost? First, we have fixed cost, right? And second, we have variable cost. But total cost is the same as economic cost, or equivalent to whatever. So economic cost includes first explicit cost, and we have implicit cost. Okay. Let's move on to the next page. Okay, from this page, I want to let you guys to highlight this. Marginal cost is one of the most important concepts that you should understand. That you must understand what it means and how to calculate this and how to draw the graph, because you should draw this at almost every paper 3 exams. Okay, so marginal cost. So we have the term marginal. We know the definition of marginal, right? Which is additional or extra. So we have additional cost of producing one more unit of output. So it's not really hard. So we just want to know the cost for additional cost when we produce one more unit of output. So if we express this in terms of the formulaic form, we have MC is equal to change in TC for a cost over change in quantity. Because we want to know how much cost changes when there is additional output. So that's the reason why we have change in quantity for denominator, but we haven't worked cost for numerator. So we've covered, so MC equals delta TC over delta Q. I prefer to use this notation because it's actually quite short. And even in your actual exam, you can use this notation. Really? Really? Okay. So here is a parenthesis, and inside you can see some weird thing that you don't understand perhaps, and I'll explain why it works. So what is delta TC? But we know the definition of TC first, right? So total cost is TFC plus total TVC. So TFC is for fixed cost, and TVC is for total variable cost. So total cost consists of total fixed cost and total variable cost. Okay, then change in total cost, delta PC, is change in total fixed cost plus change in total variable cost. Okay, so delta is like x. Delta is like x, like 5 is 2 plus 3, right? Then 5x is 2x plus 3x. It works as well, right? So it's just like in that way. So we just multiply delta. It's not in that way actually, but just you can think in that way. Okay? So delta TC divide by Q, delta TFC divide by Q, and delta TVC divided by Q is the same. If you learn in math, then you understand this works as well, right? So even if you divide this value by Q, if you like left hand and right hand is the like divide by Q, because they are equally divided, so they have the same value still. Therefore, delta TC over delta Q, delta TFC over delta Q plus delta TVC over delta Q is the same. However, delta TFC over delta Q is quite weird. So what does it mean is that the change in the total fixed cost is affected by the change in the quantity. That is not the one that we usually think about the fixed cost. Fixed cost should not be correlated with the change in the quantity output or the produced. So, which means that the change in the total fixed cost, depending on the change in the quantity, is always 0. Therefore, when we cancel out this weird term, then we will only have the delta TVC over delta Q. So, in summary, marginal cost is the same as delta TC over delta Q. But this also same as change in total variable cost over change in quantity of output. Let's move on. So now we will recover average cost. Average cost is another important concept that you should understand. Not like marginal cost, because marginal cost is the most important, the hardest one to understand, but average doesn't really hard. Because average is like the concept that you know very well. I hope so. So average cost or average total cost, which is ATC, is just total cost per output, which is the average, right? And this is the same as the unit cost, because you know when you want to produce one unit, you know how much you need to cost. That's the reason why ATC is the same as the unit cost. Okay, so we can say ATC or AC. And we have average fixed cost, which is AFC. Just TFC over Q. It's not really hard, so I'll just skip it. Average variable cost, which is ABC. ABC is of course TVC over Q. So this is quite important. ATC is equal to AFC plus ABC. Okay, it's not really hard, so we'll just skip it. And this is for review. So now we covered two different things. The first thing is production. The second thing is cost. And lastly, we have revenue. So first, we have production, we have cost, and lastly, we have revenue. So for these things, we have three different things to consider: total variable, average variable, marginal variable. The most important thing is, of course, marginal variables. And the most important thing is, of course, marginal cost and marginal product. The reason is you should understand the concept of law of diminishing returns, and And that's the reason why you should know what it means. So let's review. What is marginal product? Marginal product is the change, when there is additional output or input, how much the production changes, right? So change in total product divided by change in labor or capital, whatever. Or just say L over K, L or K, okay? And we have marginal cost. Marginal cost is additional cost that you should pay when there is one more unit of output. So MC is change in total cost over change in quantity of output. You should remember this. These are the most important thing, and you should know how to compute it. And we will practice it from the next slide. So this is for your practice. I didn't put the practice, but this is practice, whatever. So you can stop the video for a while or pause the video and you can work on this practice. Okay, so we will start to fill in the blank in this table. And we have first quantity of output, and we have quantity of labor, which is input. So this is output. And we have input. And we have total fixed cost, total variable cost, total cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost, and most importantly, marginal cost. Okay, so first, we know what total cost means. The total cost is same as TFC plus TVC. So, TC for the first output or 6 labor is 130. Okay? And total fixed cost. And based on this relationship, we can find out the total variable cost. So TC minus TFC is same as TVC, which is 50. And 100 plus 85 is 185, which is the total cost for the 17th labor. And we want to know the total variable cost for the 23rd labor, which is TC minus TFC. So 115. And for the 32nd labor, we have 130. And for the last one, we have the total cost of 100 plus 310, yes, so which is 410. So we filled the blank here, and now we'll move on to the average cost. So first, average fixed cost and average variable cost and average total cost. But we first need to think about the mathematical notation or formula for each of them. So average fixed cost is just TFC divided by quantity, and average variable cost is TVC divided by quantity, and average total cost is total cost divided by quantity. So we know quantity here, not these values because these are input. But we want to use output here, which is Q. So for the third output, the average fixed cost, we first have the total fixed cost, which is 100. And our quantity is 3. So the average fixed cost is this value divided by this. So 100 divided by 3 is 33.3. And for the average fixed cost again, which is TFC divided by Q. But here, the important observation is TFC is same for all of different outputs. It's because the definition of the fixed cost is the cost that is the cost that does not change in terms of the change in the quantity produced. Therefore, TFC is the same for all of different outputs. Okay, so we just need to fix our numerator as 100, and we just need to put the value of Q for each of row. So for this one, we have 100 divided by 4, which is 25. And I'll just skip this. No, not that. So I'll just skip this box, and we will see this average variable cost now. So for average variable cost, we just have TVC, which is 50 here, and we want to divide this value by 2, the quantity. So 50 divided by 2 is 25. Now we'll skip these boxes, and we will work on ATC now. So ATC, we have total cost, which is 165 for the third output, and we want to divide this value by the quantity of 3, which is 165 divided by 3. If you calculate this, you have 55. And I'll just skip this, not this box. And lastly, we have marginal cost. This is not really hard, but can be tricky because there are too many values in this table. That's the reason why you can be confused. But it's not really hard because we know the definition of the marginal cost, which is change in total cost divided by change in quantity, right? Then change in total cost is the same as change in fixed cost plus change in total variable cost divided by change in quantity. And this is same as change in total fixed cost over change in quantity plus change in TVC over delta Q. Since the change in the total fixed cost is 0, right? It does not change when Q changes, when Q increases. Therefore, it is 0 numerically, and we only want to find out the change in the TVC, depending on the change in the quantity. So, MC is equal to delta TVC over delta Q. Okay, so we will start with the tens labor here, and the total cost, the change in the total variable cost from the first output to the second output is 20, increased by 20, right? But the change in the quantity is 1. Therefore, the marginal cost for this row is 20. How about the next? So the change in the total variable cost is 15, plus 15. So our marginal cost is 15. How about here? Total variable cost is increased by 15. Therefore, our marginal cost is 15 as well. So if we see the answer, oh, I made a mistake here. Okay, interesting. So it's 115, but I mentioned 130, right? But actually what we have for total cost here is 260, and total fixed cost is 100. So the total variable cost is total cost, subtract this from this total fixed cost. Therefore, TVC is 260 minus 100, which is 160. It is possible to make a mistake. So if we calculate the marginal cost, the change in the total variable cost is 45, plus 45. So the marginal cost for its value is 45. And you should check the other answers as well. So this means that you should solve this before I explain the values, okay? Actually, you should know how to do this because like many of paper 3 questions were asked to fill in the blank. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, we have covered a lot of things for this cost section, and now we should know how to draw the graph of MC curve. Of course, it is better to know how to draw ATC curve and average fixed cost as well, but usually it is okay to know this most important thing, okay? So marginal cost curve, it looks like that. And actually the values is come from the table that you have seen before. Okay? So if we analyze the characteristic of this curve, it looks like this. So it starts to decrease initially and it comes to the minimum point. Sorry for my drawing. And it starts to increase after the minimum point, right? And it increases really fast, right? So this curve actually like the reflected version of the marginal production curve. So if you draw the marginal production curve based on this marginal cost curve, we should have the graph that looks like this. And this is marginal product curve for the labor. Now sorry for my drawing again. So if you see that, you now can understand the relationship between the marginal curve and the marginal production curve, which is inverse relationship. So marginal cost and marginal production, or production and cost, have the inverse relationship. So that's the important observation as well. I will delete marginal production curve, and now I will analyze marginal cost curve only. So I mentioned here is the minimum, and here is where the law of diminishing returns happen again. Of course, it's not diminishing returns, but it's actually an increase, right? It's not diminished development, but you can think it's actually incremental movements because it starts to increase, right? But what increases is the cost. Do you think the increase in cost is a good thing? It's not. It's really kind of chaotic thing. It's not really chaotic, but it's like negative thing. So like the increase in the cost is not the good thing. You can think this is the point where the law of diminishing returns happen, or just the minimum is where LDR happens. Whatever you want, you can memorize or remember in any way, any manner. Okay. So from this point, to this point, from the initial, it starts to it decreases, and then. So if you learn the calculus, you should learn concave upward, concave downward, and this is concave upward. So you guys need to learn calculus. I mentioned it. So it is concave upward. So it decreases at a decreasing rate. Decrease at a decreasing rate. At a decreasing rate. And after this point, it starts to increase at an increasing rate because it is concave upward. Sorry for mentioning calculus. For the people who don't like math, but I have an addiction to calculus, so I can't not to mention this. Okay. Understand? So this is marginal cost curve, and we will move on to practice. Okay. So this is our last slide. We will do some practice to draw marginal cost curve. So we first need to draw y-axis, and we have x-axis. For x-axis, we have quantity. Again, we should fully label it if you can. And we have cost, or you can just say price. Okay. So you should fully label your diagram, and MC curve will look like this. It's not really hard. So MC curve. It should have the minimum point. It should start to decrease initially, but after this point, it should start to increase, and that's the only thing that you should consider. And if you have the case that you should draw like both curves, MC curve and epi curve, then you just need to make some dots from the LDR downward and just draw marginal production curve fancifully. Yeah, and that's everything for today.